In regards to a possible ceasefire, military chiefs from over 30 countries are currently at the French capital for talks on creating an international force to deter future Russian aggression once a ceasefire is established. They include troop size, location and, most crucially, military options in the aim to dissuade Moscow from launching another offensive after any ceasefire in Ukraine comes into effect. The long list of participants in these discussions include Asian and nations such as Australia, Japan and New Zealand. Joining me now from Glasgow is Dr Gavin Hall, a NATO specialist at the University of Strathclyde. Dr Hall, thank you very much for your time. Now, according to media reports, the emphasis today is being on what sort of international peacekeeping force could be in place to deter another large-scale Russian offensive after the implementation of a ceasefire. So, from where you're standing, what can we expect to emerge from these talks, given the incredible logistical complexity of creating such an operation?
Yes, good afternoon. And you're certainly right there to state that it is a incredible logistical challenge, and it's not necessarily one that European countries have a particular capability to do at the moment, particularly without American support and underwriting it. So there's lots of discussion around who and how far they're actually would be prepared to extend security guarantees, particularly involving France and the United Kingdom and the ultimate deterrent of nuclear weapons, whether these would be prepared to be underwriting what this sort of peacekeeping force would translate to. But it's more a little bit more fundamental than that, is that we have an organisation in NATO that's been securing Europe for 75 odd years. The logical solution would be for NATO to take the lead and take the role in securing Europe's borders and deterring Russia. Establishing a new type of institution or organisation to be able to take on this particular challenge and sort of counter Russia's insistence that Ukraine can't be a member of NATO has a whole host of problems to it, particularly to do with separating them and ensuring there's enough separation from NATO to enable Russia to essentially be appeased and be happy with it, to allow it as a peacekeeping option. So there are many problems there in how people want to contribute their militaries, what type of strength they're going to be willing to risk and actually put troops on the ground. Is that going to be all of these 30 countries, or is it more going to be reliant on the UK, who've already said they're going to prepare to put troops on the ground, and others? But more fundamentally, is this kind of sort of preempting what could happen? Is it actually going to be helpful in terms of the peace negotiations? Is it going to be aid bringing about a ceasefire, or is it effectively sort of encouraging the conflict to carry on further because there's this promised backstop of potential military options down the line in the future?
As I mentioned there, some 30 nations are taking part in these discussions, including Asian countries and also other nations such as Australia, New Zealand and Japan. NATO member Turkey has also been invited. Again, you mentioned there about NATO being the obvious sort of in charge of all this, but surely such an operation goes way beyond a normal NATO scenario, given the broad international scope. So is NATO capable of leading such an operation?
The short answer to that is yes, and it's demonstrated so with the ISAF mission in Afghanistan, which managed 71 partners, I think it was, including Australia, Japan and various other Asian countries. So one of the big assets that NATO has is the integrated military command that enables different countries to supply military force and capabilities that can then be managed and dealt with. So NATO has a history of being able to do this. A new organisation starting from scratch, that all has to be built and developed, and That's not an easy process to do, which is one of the reasons why NATO still exists in the sort of the post-Cold War world.
And do we have any idea at this stage? I mean, you mentioned there obviously the British having talked about committing troops to the ground, but what other commitments have been made or talked about, including funding and logistical support for this proposed security force?
Yeah, well, as I'm sure you are well aware, there may be certain funding issues European-wide generally. Most countries are probably not spending enough on their defence. Talk about increasing the sort of defence spending up towards 2.5–3% of GDP European-wide. That will certainly help, but it's coming from a position of decline, whereby even the UK's recent increase to 2.5% of GDP is still down in real terms than the position in 2009. So there's lots of catch up that needs to be done to offer us any form of credibility, which is the key here for how such a security force could actually operate and could actually function specifically. But most countries have generally been sort of broad statements. We agree in principle that this type of thing could be something that we want to encourage and look at, rather than actually making any firm specific commitments. Because one of the critiques of the UK position, I think by Germany particularly, was, why are you offering this now? Peace talks haven't even started yet. Ceasefire negotiations haven't taken place. You're jumping the gun. It's too early. So it's good to talk and have an idea and a feel of what different countries may or may not be prepared to do, but firm commitments are unlikely at this stage.
And as you mentioned earlier, there's been some caution from a number of Western officials that there's several stages to a peace plan, and certainly a broader range of countries could join the coalition later on. However, the first step surely would be a 1-month halt to fighting, let's say. But even to do that, certainly, doesn't there have to be an international presence on the ground to begin with?
Not necessarily, and I think part of the reason why sort of the initial focus of this proposed ceasefire seems to be on air and missiles, and also in the Black Sea. There's no trust between Ukraine and Russia. Whatever either side says, the other side simply isn't going to accept that at face value. So trust has to be built, and in many ways, one side needs to make effectively a leap to trust, to say we're prepared to trust this. So it'll be a ceasefire that's incorporated on a sort of a stage basis, slowly building up to a full ceasefire. So I think ideally the initial phase would be, right, let's get something agreed, it holding and working, thereby you can then start to build trust that can then feed into relatively the subsequent peace talks and things. That said, I think Russia could gain a significant political propaganda advantage by unilaterally declaring a ceasefire and saying, we're going to stop now, and then leave it up to Ukraine to decide how it wants to respond. Does Ukraine keep on attacking into Russia, or it puts it in a very awkward situation? Because the moment you agree a ceasefire, the position on the ground effectively becomes the default negotiating position, which is the territorial gains that Russia has inside Ukraine at the moment.
And finally, Dr Hall, just sort of broadening out this chat further, I mean, clearly there's been a lot of discussion in recent weeks about boosting European defence, and certainly with Washington pivoting away from Europe. Is all of this not inevitable, in that the time has come for Europe to defend itself and to start off by helping Ukraine?
Yes, and this is, in a way, this is sort of a conversation that's been going on over many years, as I'm sure you're aware. You've had common European security and foreign policies organised by the EU, which would be the logical body to have an independent European defence capability. But it always comes back to the question, who's actually going to be in charge of this? And France and Germany tend to always be competing and not necessarily willing to give up or acknowledge the other's ability to be in command. So there's inherent political tensions within the European Union as to what should actually be the driving force that's going on there. And it kind of always comes back to the ultimate security guarantee, nuclear weapons. Is France prepared to hand over not control, but the ability to use into a European command structure, or does it want to maintain them as an independent capability? If it's the latter, then it's effectively France is underwriting and securing the future of the European Union, which might well be a position that France would be happy with. But is it something that is actually sustainable and they has a degree of credibility to it, because they would actually be prepared to come to the aid of the Baltic states or Poland?
Dr Hall, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much.
Thank you.